this workshop, just so you guys know, is gonna apply almost exclusively to what's available in Ultimate. Some of it obviously for Ultimate 23, but the ability of selections in Ultimate 24 is so much more advanced than even 23. So this will be a nice glimpse to understand what you can do in 24, but a lot of the things will also work for Ultimate 23. So I'm going to open this little spring photo in edit mode. Just want to make sure I'm sharing edit mode. Okay, so obviously, probably all of you guys are aware of the selections you can do with AI actions. Select subject, select the background, select the sky, remove the background. It's basically two steps. So it'll operate, select background, and then it'll remove it. Blur background will do the same thing. It will either select the subject or so if it selects the subject, then it obviously the background is an inversion of that selection and it applies a blur. And the black and white background is the same, but instead of adding a blur, it'll add black and white. So let's start with the most obvious one, which is select subject and see what happens. So it did a pretty good job. If you can see the details in the corners here, they're really, really well selected. And 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, you'll find yourself that the selection is almost there, but it's not perfect. So whenever you're using either select subject, select background, or select sky, you will see the selection either in red, or if you're using Ultimate for the first time, I'm pretty sure that the default option is the marching ants option. So probably if you've just installed Ultimate, you will see your selection like this with the marching ants. However, most of the time it's not the easiest way to work with because it's just easier to see it as an overlay. So how do you change that? All you have to do is go to select and go to the overlay options, which is what we just did. And then you can select to have your selection highlighted, which is where we were. You can choose the color you want. We'll just go with the red, or you can also select, you can have your selection exposed, which is the opposite. But the easiest way, the most intuitive way is the selection highlighted. As you can see, our selection is almost there, but I'm missing just a little bit here, right? So whenever you create a selection with either select subject, select background, or select sky, you will be able to change the selection, either add to it or subtract from it. And so if you go ahead to the top left menu of ACDSee, you will see the brush selection, or you can also hit Control B. When you do that, it will open our brush tool. And to add to the selection, we just have to, and I'm going to reduce the nib width a little bit, add a little bit of feathering, and then you can just brush over the part that was not selected. Let me know if you can see the red applying to this little branch here that we previously did not have selected. Okay, so here's another trick. If you find yourself that you need to add to your selection, and you can obviously see that there's a pretty nice difference either in light or in color between what you want to select and what you don't want to select. You can choose up here, you can choose smart brushing. So what is smart brushing? Smart brushing is when you brush, ACDSee will take into consideration the pixels, the color pixels that are in your selection or in the area of your brush. And you can see the little pointer right in the middle of your brush. It will take those pixels into consideration, or it will operate based on the little target you have in the middle of the brush, and it will try to exclude everything that is not that color. Now, you can either use color, you can use brightness, but you can also use magic, and magic is usually the best way to go because it's a combination of color and brightness information that ACDSee takes into account when you're selecting a subject, an object, whatever it is. So I'm going to go ahead and click on magic. Yes, you have to select the brush first, mark right here, and then this menu will open. So tolerance is you either want it to be very tolerant, and usually it's a really good way to go. So let's see. What if I start brushing sort of chaotically inside the stem here? You will see that it's doing a pretty good job at stopping the selection right there at the edge. But sometimes it won't work as well. And as you can see, we do have some of the red outside of our stem. So just play around with the tolerance. You can set your tolerance to 50 and then try again. And that way you might need to brush more over a specific area, but you'll make sure that you are not selecting anything that is outside from the information in those pixels, the brightness and color of the pixels that you have selected with your brush. Obviously, you might still, at some point, select outside of the area that you want. And then the easiest way to fix that is to just right-click on the area that you don't want. So I'm right-clicking here, right there, left-clicking on the stem, just to make this close to perfect, right? So remember, left-click, you're adding to your selection. Right-click, you are taking away, you're deselecting. And so a really, really good way to, or a really good workflow when you're using edit mode and you're trying to select a subject that you want to enhance or that you want to separate from your background is to start with one of these selections, select subject, select background, or select sky, and then either add or remove from your selection using the brush selection tool. Okay, so, right, I think a little bit, Arthur asked us, is there a way to soften the edges of the selection? Sometimes the effects ends up too harsh, and that is completely true. So what you can do in that case is to go up to the Select tab on your menu and go to Refine. In Refine, you can shift the edges of that selection to either go in if you reduce the slider to the left, or to go slightly out. And what you can do after that is to apply feathering. So feathering is what will create that softness in the selection. So now I've exaggerated the feathering so that you can see in your screens But most of the time, you just want to be really subtle with your edit. Click done. And now you will see your overlay. The corners will be the edges will be a lot more smooth. So again, to smoothen out the edges of your selection, just go to Select and Refine. Okay, so once you have your selection, what can we do here? What I like to do when I'm using develop mode is to always, when I have a selection, I'd like to duplicate it or just copy and paste. So I'll do Control C, Control V, and you will notice how now I have two layers. One layer is the background, and the other layer is the selection that I just separated from the photo into a different layer. And so to my eyes, what I'd like to see in this photo is a bit more separation between the subject and the background. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, in between my top layer and my bottom layer, I'm just going to add an exposure adjustment. And you can see it's right there in the middle. And I'm going to reduce the exposure. And so just by reducing the exposure, remember, if you go here to the bottom left, you can click Show Saved, and it'll show you the original version of your photo. And this is the after. So I might have gone a bit too harsh on the reduction of exposure, but I'm definitely able to create more depth in my image by selecting my subject, separating from the background, and applying an exposure layer only for the background. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, that's really good. So a lot of the times you will be in edit mode and you'll be like, oh, why can't I, keep working? You will have to remember to click on commit. So when you click on commit, your edits are applied and you can now start deleting layers or adding layers. And so that's a really good thing to keep in mind. So that's what Barbara maybe was suggesting, that was why Mark wasn't seeing refine in select, is because you have to always remember to click on commit when you're doing an edit. We're just going to discard these changes and move on to the next photo. Okay, so if I'm editing and considering the same principles of trying to separate my subject from the background by creating selections and affecting those selections in different ways, after I select my subject, you can see that the bird is really, really well selected, but I should also have this trunk here selected because it's on the same plane. If you go to your selection, so this little area here on the top menu, these are all of your selection options. And we have already seen what you can do with brush selection, right? And so if you don't have 24 and you wanted to add this extra trunk here to your selection, just obviously click on the brush selection and brush over the trunk, and then probably apply some smart brushing to only to only select the trunk and not the outer part of it. Okay. But if you have 24, and let's go back. If you have ACDSee Ultimate 2024, you can go ahead and click on the AI object selection. And then just intuitively create a selection around the object. And just like that, a very satisfying process, you are able to select that part of the bird, that part of your image that was not selected before. The cool thing about AI object selection, and just as it's the same as how shape selection, rectangular selection, elliptical selection work, you can keep adding or subtracting from your selection. So if I wanted to deselect something, you can just go ahead here on the top and click on this subtract from selection. So what happens if I go ahead and select the bird? Now the bird was deselected. If I want to add the bird, we'll do the opposite. I just want to have, yeah, take a moment to see you guys to see how cool AI object selection is, because it's really amazing. For example, I have this photo and I'm going to go to AI object selection. And I'm going to select this little boat here. It's amazing. It even got the little like that little flag here. And then I can just keep adding to that selection. So I can select all of my boats if I wanted to. And then I'll do what I did before, which is Control C, Control V. And just so that you can see what we can do, I'm just going to reduce the exposure again, which is like a pretty simple edit. Maybe reduce the contrast of my background and my exposure. Starting to look a little strange, but now my boats are fully exposed, correctly exposed how they were before, and they're a lot more prominent in the photo. Not necessarily what you want to do with this photo, but just so that you can see the power of AI object selection. Yes, so AI object selection is only available in ACDSee Ultimate 2024. Okay, so what other options do we have? If you open the Select tab on the top menu, you will see these other two options that you don't see on the right side where you have your AI actions. It's the luminance and color range and your channel selection. I am going to quickly leave you guys with because we won't have time to cover all of this stuff, but Adam, about I think a year or 2 years ago, did a really, really good workshop that covers the channel selection and selection basket. So I'm going to copy that and paste it in the chat. So let me know if you can see that link, because we won't be able to go into channel selection. But if that's something you're interested, definitely check out that other video. What we're going to go for now is the luminance and color range selection. And as you might have intuitively guessed, the luminance range selection in this menu allows you to select based on the luminance or brightness points of the pixels in your image, and the color range allows you to select color areas or color ranges of your image. So if I activate color range, my wheel will activate. And let's say I want to select only the reds and try to make them slightly more orange, for example. So I'm going to start adjusting my wheel. So two ways you can, multiple ways you can adjust your wheel. You can obviously expand one arm like this, left and right. You can expand the bottom arm. And if you drag the middle arm, you will move the entire triangle of selection around. So I'm going to try to select only the reds. If you put your mouse in the middle of your color wheel, you can also move this. What does this do? It's basically selecting the saturation of that tonality. And so I have my reds selected here in this triangle, but as you can see, when you go closer to the center, you'll start to see gray. And that's because it's the same level of pixel of reds. It's starting to desaturate as you go towards the center of your photo. So if you want to make sure you're not selecting any grays, just drag the center of the color wheel like that. And then you'll see that I'm only selecting the brightest of reds in my photo. You can make that selection a bit more smooth, which will add some feathering around the selection. And skin targeting you can use when you're trying to select the skin of a person, which is not this case right now. Okay, so that looks good to me. I'm going to click OK. And now I only have the reds, the bright reds in my image selected. On the bottom here, you will see that there's some little tiny reds. Oops, that's too much zoom. Oh, and I thought those were the color range had incorrectly selected these little parts here, but I can actually tell now that these are also leaves. So it makes sense that those are also selected. I guess that's why you use color range selection, because it just looks at your overall image and tries to select that specific color. So just as I did before, I'm going to click Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll hide my background layer just so you can see how ACDSee was able to select only that color range. By the way, if you want to hide certain layers, sorry, you just have to click on the eye icon next to your layer panel, like that. So I'll open Color EQ, and I don't know how good this is going to turn out, but we're just going to give it a shot. I'll select Color EQ. And so to make sure that I'm only affecting my selection here, I'm going to clip the mask. And again, if you want to clip the mask, just click on this little icon here, and it'll turn into an arrow pointing downwards. To change a color, but see, let's just go step by step. If I reduce vibrance, I am fully removing those reds from my image. It's basically minus 100 in vibrance. It's just the same as desaturating. Because the difference between saturation and vibrance is that um, vibrance affects the color that is not sort of the main color of your photo. So if you have people in an image and you increase vibrance, you will increase the colors, not of the skin tones, but everything else. Saturation will increase the colors of everything in your photo. I can go totally the opposite and bring vibrance to 100, but we're just going to stick with 0 and we're going to move over to hue right here. So I am in the color EQ on the bottom right. And now if I start changing the hue of my red slider, you will notice how only that area is starting to shift color. And so if instead I didn't want to go so red and I wanted a bit more of orange, just by reducing the hue on the red slider on my red selection, then I'm changing only those colors. And I can keep going. I could decide, maybe I want my greens to be brighter. So I'll go again to select. Oh, here's another thing that might happen to you. If all of your options are grayed out, it's probably because you haven't committed your edits. So I'm just going to commit and go to select again. Again, I'm going to go to color range, but now I'm going to select only the greens. There. So it's a combination of greens and yellows. And as you can see, if I leave my color wheel extended 100% from the center outwards, I'm also selecting this top area of the roof, which I don't want. And then all I have to do is just drag my middle point of my wheel inwards towards the color. And I'll increase a little bit of smoothness. And I don't need to exactly select this because I'm just going to increase brightness just slightly. Okay, so that's good. Now I have my greens selected. I'll hit Control C, Control V. And then I'm going to add an exposure layer on top of my greens. But because I only want to affect my greens, which is this layer here, I'll also have to select um, this little icon right here to clip uh, this layer to this one. So I'll click commit again. And I'm going to raise the exposure and contrast because I want it just to pop a lot more. So that's before. So now I'm deactivating. If you want to see what you've done with your layer adjustments, just deactivate that specific layer. In this case, the one that we have on top of the green, and you can see the difference in your edit. So that's another way that you can select through the colors of your photo. And we are running a little bit out of time, but let's see if I can show. Let's see if we can use some of the luminance selection. Maybe on this image here. So I'm going to go to select luminance color range. And I'm going to select luminance range. So you will see this little rectangle here that showcases you the different luminance points of your image, which go from 0, which is perfect black, to 255, which is perfect white. So the two sliders that you have here on the top, when you drag them left or right, is sort of this how to say, like it's a full cut into the um that color range. So that luminance range, sorry. So everything that's above, in this case, let's see, 100, everything that's above 100 is being selected. If I drag the other top um, slider here and I move it to, let's say, 200, then I am selecting between 100 and 200 luminance points exactly. I'm not selecting 99. I'm not selecting 201. Okay. If you wanted to create a smoother selection of your luminance values, then you can drag the bottom sliders. So if I drag my bottom slider to the left, I'm going to select some of that 0, and I'm going to gradually move onto 100. So this will make that selection, it sort of creates this slope, if you can imagine, of your selection. So let's just select our sky using the luminance range. And you can see that we have also selected a little bit of our reflections here on the bottom, right? That's okay. So I've selected my sky and just only the brighter areas of my photo because I am only selecting the areas between 196 and 255. Maybe I'll be, yeah, there. Okay, that's good. I'll add some detail so that my edges are a bit more refined. Click OK. Control C, Control V. I'll add an exposure layer, and I'm going to clip it only to my and you can see now I've deactivated the background, and you can see that the luminance selection is now obvious. I've only selected the brighter areas of my photo. So I can now, for example, reduce the exposure only on those bright areas. And sometimes you will notice that by doing this, by selecting a specific luminance range of your photo, it becomes the exposure adjustments, for example, on a blown out sky, can be a lot easier to create compared to, let's say, using the tone curves. Because in the tone curves, you have to put exactly certain points that will only select your sky or the blown out area of your photo. But if you use luminance range selection, it's a lot easier. So not a big edit. I mean, I've actually reduced the exposure a lot, and now I have a lot more of a pleasant highlights in my photo. You can see that I can see so much more detail in my sky. I can see a lot more detail in the water reflection as well. So now I could add a curve adjustment on the top of all of my edit. Now that I've sort of fixed the sky, I can create more contrast in my entire photo by using the S curves. Sorry, by using a tone curve and maybe applying what can look like an S curve. So that's a possible edit. And this is how our image looked before and how it looks after. Well, I think, yeah, okay, guys. Well, I hope you have a really nice weekend, and I will see you next time.